fans of a Horus Heresy, molecular bonding studs, and the history of armour design. Thank you very much for joining me and Jay from Legion of Two for episode 5 of Legion of Cheese. How are you today, Jay?
Yes, I'm doing well. Very pleased after seeing what we saw there in our most recent Heresy Thursday.
Oh yes, you've had a chance to calm down a bit, haven't you? It was a big one for you, wasn't it, this?
Oh, it was great. Yeah, I shed a tear when I saw the Rivenhound finally getting his miniature after all this time.
Well, yeah, Endred Har. I mean, quite a character in Heresy, isn't he? And for the viewers on screen now, we've got a photo of this new model. Obviously, beware of Games Workshop marketing photos because I have a habit of underplaying a model. But yeah, he looks pretty darn ferocious to me.
He does, yeah. He really exemplifies the lore of what he may or may not be. Don't want to say anything for people who maybe don't know a lot about the characters, but he does look like an absolute unit.
He does, yeah. He looks huge, even for a Space Marine.
Mm-hmm.
And top tip, so dear viewers, listening recommendation here, the Black Shields trilogy, audio drama by Josh Reynolds. So this is the False War, the Broken Chain, and the Red Thief. Well worth a listen to. And you
Very
will,
much so.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? And it's good Heresy storytelling, but also you get to find out who Endred Har really is. Of course, the other thing about the Endred Har miniature is he is clearly wearing what people call Mark V Heresy powered armour. And that's what we want to talk about today, if I can get my words in the correct order. There's always a chance I'll get it right if I try enough times. We're going to talk about Mark V Space Marine armour, aren't we?
Indeed, yes. My personal favourite set of armour through all the iterations we have.
A bold claim. So, I mean, fair enough. It's got a unique look to it compared to all the other Space Marine armours, doesn't it? It's covered in molecular bonding studs. It looks a bit rougher, less sophisticated, and that was good visual design as we'll come to in terms of what it represents. So,
very much so for the time that they put it in the lore, with the sense of the ramshackle nature of just literally put it together, put it on somebody, send them to fight.
We've got thousands of crates of old power armor component parts. We don't have the bits to make these new fancy Mark 6 suits or even repair all the Mark 4, so we're going to have to improvise. And this is what we've come up with. Yeah, episode 5, Legion of Cheese. And we're going to be talking about Mark 5 armor. So yeah, if there was ever a time to talk about Mark 5 armor for title synergy, now is it. And what we want to get into is a bit of a history of Mark V armour in terms of, I suppose there's two bits to this. There's like the background story and then there's the evolution of the design, so the artwork and the miniatures. And I thought we would just take a look at that today because some of it goes back a long, long way, doesn't it? There's been quite a lot of different takes on Mark V armour, even in its idea of what is Mark V, inverted commas, production armour, as opposed to Mark V. Is it improvised or Mark V non-production?
Yeah, Mark V non-production would be the alternate variant of what we would call standard Mark V with all the bonding studs.
That's right. And that Mark V non-production is kind of catch-all term for all of the improvised suits of armour that the Marines threw together during the Heresy.
Yeah. First mentioned in the book Deliverance Lost, actually, when the Imperial Fist character presented the Raven Guard with the 2,000 units of the Mark VI that they'd stolen from Mars in the short story Templar by John French. And they obviously told him it's called Corvus, it's Mark VI, it's because it has a beak, ha ha ha. And he goes, Commander Bran of the Raven Guard says, Mark VI? Why not Mark V? And he goes, everything between 4 and the production of these suits and all the ramshackle nature is now considered Mark V. And he points and goes, you're actually wearing it. Because at this point, Commander Bran has, I believe he had like 3 and 4 hybridized.
Yeah.
Because of obviously the requirements they had for the Raven Guard to be doing all their missions and things, and a lack of production lines and things.
Yeah.
So yeah, he basically every Raven Guard except for the 2,000 Raptors that got the new Mark VI all essentially wore 5.
Yeah, I see. So that's really interesting to know, and I'd forgotten that. So I have listened to Deliverance Lost. It's a good story, particularly if you like Alpha Legion shenanigans. But yeah, I'd forgotten that detail point, and that's really interesting now, because originally when Mark V was described as a concept, there was no concept of this Mark V non-production. It was just described as being Mark V production armor. Well, they didn't call it that. They called it Mark V Heresy suit, and it was basically an interim design that was done to use components left over from the Mark II and III program, whatever else could be manufactured by the forgers when there wasn't enough equipment and resources available to repair the more sophisticated Mark IV suits or build new, more refined Mark VI suits. So yeah, Mark V production was that. Born of the Heresy armor, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It also had a little bit of the, well, according to canon, depending on what era you take it from, it also had a wee bit of the concept of using the spare parts from the Tactical Dreadnought program. It's one of those ways they tried to tie in why Tiberos the Redwake is not only also an absolute unit, that his Terminator armor carries the same Mark V helmet, but obviously on a Terminator suit.
Yeah,
and that's where they started introducing this idea that Heresy production pattern was parts of the Tactical Dreadnought program that they just didn't use when they made Cataphracti, Tartaros, and then eventually Indomitus,
Yeah, and that does tie back to the original background description from that White Dwarf article, which, if I remember rightly, and I think I've got this right, was White Dwarf 129 of the original run.
God, that was such a long time ago.
It was, yeah. I can remember young teenage leaky cheese reading that. But yeah, in that article, yes, that bit about the use of components from a Terminator program, yeah, that was in there as well. And at the time, what I think they were doing is the Mark V suit had something that looked awful, has something awfully looking like a Mark VII helmet.
Yeah.
The origins of that is the third prototype Terminator miniature that was made. So the first ever prototype miniature was Mr. Super Pauldrons, sometimes called Saturnine Armour erroneously. That was by Jez Goodwin. Yeah. Then there was the second Terminator, the Turtleback, which was I think it was by Bob Naismith. And then the third Terminator miniature, which doesn't really have a name, it's a bit forgotten, was also by Jez Goodwin. And that had a helmet very much like the Mark V and very much like a Mark VII.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it was what came after that. I'm not sure which came first, the artwork by John Blanche or the miniature design by Jez Goodwin of what we know today as Indomitus pattern Terminators. But yeah, it's a really interesting bit with Tiberius the Red Wake and tying it back to that original bit of description there. About the background.
Forge World were always very good for that, weren't they? They always loved doing the little homages to earlier bits of lore that maybe just don't get used anymore.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think Games Workshop do it a lot in miniatures in general.
Yeah,
they like putting Easter eggs in to miniatures. Perhaps with Games Workshop, you get a slightly more whimsical take, like. There was a workbench, and I can't remember who the model was. It may have been an Orc mech, but there was a mold line removal tool on the workbench. Tucked away. And there's another one where I think it's some sort of Space Marine or maybe Imperial person with like a tactical map, and it's in 3D relief on a data slate,
Yeah.
But it's actually Warhammer World.
Oh, that's not... No. I know the one you're talking about. That's not a Imperial. That's one of the guys from the Gene Stealer cult.
Ooh. Okay,
and he's got like a circular topographical map. And when you look at it from the top down, it's Warhammer World, the attaching office for their staff, and then the front of house type bit. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's sort of Imperial. The hiding on an Imperial world. I'm pleading ignorance there, or maybe all hail the six-armed deity. Have you heard the good news about the coming of the Swarm?
I would prefer not to.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So we've had a nice little preamble there about a bit of history of the Mark V armour. But before we get into the meat of today's episode, the reason we're doing this, aside from being episode 5, Mark V, is there's been a lot of smoke rings being sent out of the Games Workshop media channels which are suggesting that perhaps now is the time that they are most likely to do some more Mark V stuff. So 3 things here, I think. There's 3 recent miniatures that have been previewed. There was firstly the Alpha Legion Saboteur. There was then one of the 2 new Apothecary or Medic models, both in Mark V. Yeah, oh yes, I can't wait for those. Absolutely can't wait. And then, just yesterday, so that'll be February the 16th? No, February the 15th, we had Endred Haar previewed. And he's very clearly wearing Mark V armour. So there's that, isn't there? And then there's the other recent announcement, which is a second campaign book for Age of Darkness, Horus Heresy, which is the Battle of Beta Garman. And this surprised both of us, didn't it?
Very much so. To have Beta Garman expanded upon is quite nice, actually, because it was always mentioned in the lore. And obviously we got some points of view in the actual novel series, like, I believe, was it Titan Death or Titanfall? It was one of those books by Guy Haley.
Titanfall, yeah.
Yeah.
Titan Death, yeah.
Yeah, and that focused a bit on Beta Garman, but because of, obviously, the way he was portraying it around certain characters and around about more of the Titan battles, we didn't get a lot of the nitty-gritty. And in the Endred Haar audio drama, it actually this isn't really a spoiler, but it ends with him saying, "Make course for Beta Garman."
It does, yeah.
Now, originally, as we know, there was meant to be more than 3 of these, so we would assume that was meant to be a lead-in for more stories about how Endred fought on the planets of Beta Garman before he got to the book Saturnine, which was his last appearance. And that was like, there's a massive disconnect there of, chronologically, what would you say, Leaky, about a year technically in Heresy lore between Beta Garman and that part of the Siege of the Imperial Palace? So there's a lot there they can play with.
I just forget now the timeline from the Heresy Weekend events. You remember those charts I used to put up, which put the chronology together? But thematically, yes, I think it's probably a year or maybe a year and a half, because the Battle of Beta Garman was, in strategic sense, it was a nexus that had to be controlled for any campaign to be launched against the terror system.
It was a well-chosen choke point for the Imperials to try and hold the traitors at bay.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. As you say, that's kind of where the Black Shields trilogy ends, isn't it? So, they picked that up. So I think it's a great setting, isn't it? It's a battle of great influence, a great impact on the heresy as a narrative thing. And it's something that they've not yet done in the tabletop heresy game.
No.
It's previously had a lot of attention as part of Adeptus Titanicus, and I think it's also getting there's an upcoming supplement for Legions Imperialis as well, which will focus on it.
Yes, there is indeed, yeah. Actually, this Saturday, the 17th of February, is its pre-order day. It's almost like they planned it so that both books would come out this year and they'd both focus on Beta Garman.
Yeah, it's a coincidence, yeah. Not a quit, yeah. Like Inquisitor Critman once said, like Inquisitor Critman believed, he didn't believe in coincidences.
Yeah.
As part of this Beta Garman book and the announcement around it, when they were sort of like saying what's going to be in it, they said the Black Shields are going to get rules, and they said they're going to be characters around this, and there was Endred Haar, Little Horus Aximand,
Tybalt Mar, and Shadrach Medusan. Even though he technically was never there, because we're not going to get into that semantics. They technically said that Beta Garman will focus on the Shattered Legions and the Black Shields. Now, there was Shattered Legion elements at Beta Garman, but Shadrach wasn't, because he was unfortunately titty bred by that point in time. Spoilers. But some of his elements were. And some of the elements that weren't even connected to his greater whole of trying to create that cohesive fighting force. And it would have been nice to see maybe them create another alternate character to go beside Shadrach, but because he's the most famous, for lack of a better term, Forge World and G-Dub probably just thought, we'll do him first. Because, let's have an example. The Nemrian Reaver isn't coming back to date.
No, he's not had a mention. No, that's true.
And he's the other Black Shield character, so they've assumed Endred is the more famous, and he's the one getting the mini as the poster boy for the Black Shields over the Nemrian Reaver.
Yeah. Which is an interesting choice, isn't it? We don't, I mean, there might be more coming, who knows?
Oh, I'd love to see them release them all eventually.
I mean, there's so many great characters, isn't there, for Black Shields and the Shattered Legions. It's, I mean, I always kind of imagine it as how a lot of the heresy was really fought, maybe even most of it.
Yeah.
Because while there's the core storyline with the very organised Legion combat and the big formations, I also envisage it as being this Imperium-wide civil war. And all those battles at the fringes outnumbered the devastation at as crazy as that sounds, as Horus's attack on Terra, the devastation that occurred across the Imperium more widely was greater. There were more battles fought, just smaller. Yeah. It's not got that character-driven arc that the novels have given us.
It's kind of a shame. While some people can criticize Workshop for milking the heresy in the book series and having a lot of superfluous stuff that didn't really matter, I personally think that it does, and I would have loved to have seen an anthology or two about lesser known characters, one-shot characters, little short stories about guys taking positions, holding positions, fighting, broken away from their legion. You don't need a lot of story. You don't even need to bring them back. They don't need books spanning canon. Just these little one-shots to show that the heresy was bigger than what we would call the main characters.
Yeah, that's true. And I suppose Black Library did get into that a bit with some of the, the anthologies, the collected short stories. What's it called? Tales of Heresy? Is that one?
Well, one of them was Tales of Heresy. The other one, I think, was War Without End.
War Without End, yeah. And then they got the other little standalone bits. So, for example, the Black Shields trilogy. What was the one that you recommended to me a month or so ago about the Raptors?
Oh, the Night Lord short stories. There's Raven Lord and...
the Raven Guard Raptors, beg your pardon.
Oh, now you're going to make me. Hold on, I will check
the one with the Space Wolves. Was it actually called Raptor?
Oh, it's called Raptor, yes. I thought you were talking about the short story Raven Lord, which is about the one where, I remember telling you about it, it's where Corax goes to infiltrate one of the prisons that hold Space Marines, and it's like where Fabius is making all those new men.
No, bad Fabius. Stop it.
That's also a fantastic story, because that's like Raptors coming face to face with literally they're looking in a mirror, except one of them is genetically created for a reason. The other one was just, let's super glue these bits onto this guy and see what happens.
It's like two sets of monsters fighting, isn't it? One,
exactly.
And there is a little subtext there to say, well, it's only a step beyond Space Marines fighting each other, because Space Marines are hardly normal. They're not your friend most of the time. But, sometimes they might do something that helps you, and they may sometimes sell you your life, but they're not your friend. I suppose they have done a few stories, but they could go back and do a lot more. There's so much potential there. Maybe instead of having fluffing out the End of the Death volume 1 and 2 with the Fragment series, they could have actually written a book called Heresy Fragments with a lot of little short stories and snippets, the sort of things that they sometimes drop into White Dwarf over the years.
That would be quite cool. Although that being said, they, while the End and the Death has finished, there's nothing stopping them from continuing Heresy, because at Christmas they actually released a couple of Heresy short stories that weren't Siege of Terror related, and one of them was actually about a world eater on Istvan III, who was a loyalist, cut off from his unit and still fighting the traitor world eaters.
What were those? I must have missed those.
Yeah, there was only the way Black Library at Christmas do those 12 Days of Christmas novella things that they do, and
okay.
They usually drop in 2 from each series. So you'll get 2 from, say Necromunda, they'll get 2 from 40k, 2 from AOS, 2 from Blood Bowl, and 2 from Heresy. Well, one of them was from Heresy. And I'm trying to remember. Oh, yeah, it was called The Last Loyalist. And it came out on the 24th of December. It's just a wee short story, no more than, 25, 30 pages at most. And it's just, from the point of view of a world leader who's been on Istvan for about, Istvan 3 for, 3.5 months?
Right, okay, that's interesting. And are these just freebies to download?
No, they cost about £2.
Oh, okay, right. So
Well, Black Library, obviously Black Library makes you pay for it. Yeah, they're like a little ad. They call it the Advent Calendar. That was the term, I couldn't remember,
Okay,
so
that still
12 Days of Christmas, Advent Calendar,
Yeah, that still sounds worth checking out. Yeah, good. Anyway, so stories, Beat Garman, and that brings us back to Mark V armour, doesn't it? Given all these things that have happened, we were wondering, is there a possibility of getting a plastic Mark V kit this year?
Oh, yes.
That's a 65,000. Well, sorry, that's a $30,000 question, isn't it?
Yeah. Because in our original chat and one of the previous episodes where we spoke about predictions for 2024, we did mention that we think they might copy 2023's format by having an armor upgrade and a campaign book and an exemplary battles book over the course of the year. But I always did say there should be an outline concept that they might do an armor upgrade and a potential new suit just to get the armor out. Because one of their major criticisms has been people are always saying, where's the other suits of armor? So maybe they're finally bowing to that pressure of give the people what they want, and maybe they'll stop whinging.
Yeah. Well, indeed, yeah. And yeah, it's always difficult reading the tea runes, isn't it, on what Games Workshop are doing, but I don't know. I think with what we've seen, given that they're going to be doing these several Mark V characters, and then the campaign book is about Peter Garman, and they specifically highlighted it's to do with Black Shields. I mean, if not now, then when would you do Mark V armour?
Yeah. From the point of view of all the stars aligning, this is the perfect moment. But they may look at their, analytics or profit margin and go, we're not going to do 5, we'll do 2 or 4 first. But from the point of view of, as I say, the stars aligning, this is perfect because it's almost like an own goal. We're releasing Mark V characters. We've had subtle redesigns to the Mark V armor from the original Forge and what you're going to talk about in a few minutes, the chronological aspect of the miniature. Why not release the Mark V as well?
Yeah.
Because Black Shields and Shattered Legions and even some of the Traitor Legions had a lot of Mark V because of supply line issues and the war and etc.
Yes,
it's almost like an own goal. It's a way to print money for Heresy fans because if they made it, it's like, what's that saying? Build it and they will come. Well, make it and we will buy.
Yes. Well said. Yeah, quite right. I think that's what we're thinking, isn't it? That given all these things, it feels like Mark V is a real possibility. So given that, what we just thought we'll do is spend a little bit of time going over the design history of Mark V, and it's sort of like in-game history as well, which we've touched on the in-game history a bit as well already. But I thought we'll just go through the history of the design, so in terms of the artwork and the models, just to see the different concepts and how that's evolved over the years. And brought us to where we are today. And then once we've done that, we can speculate a bit more about how it might work, because there's some questions there about with a Mark V armour suit with all the studs, how on earth do you do it in plastic? Yeah, that's a real head scratcher, isn't it? So yeah, we can think about that as well. Okay, so we need to go back to, is it 1990?
Don't like to think about that far back now because it makes me realise I'm actually getting old.
How do you think that makes me feel? Well, you know what I say. You're only as old as you feel you are.
Yeah, well, if that's the case, my knees, that means I'm in my mid-70s. My knees are in fits. There's something seriously wrong when a person of my age, right, can turn around to someone and when they mention something, you go around and go, aye, that's like such and such. And then they turn around and go, but Jay, that was 20 years ago.
I know.
To me, 2004 was last week, not 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's weird, isn't it? So, 1990.
Yep.
So, going back to the start. Now, the whole thing with Space Marine armour marks, you could say from its earliest years, the designs varied because the very first miniature of a Space Marine, so LE2, the Imperial Space Marine had a specific design. And then there was a small group of models, I think there were about half a dozen, maybe 8, which mirrored that design. I just forget who did the original model. Was it Bob Ollie?
I think it might have been, yeah.
Can't remember if it was Bob Ollie or Bob Naismith. I'll put the name on the screen with a picture of Leto as well.
Yeah.
And those came on, and then we got the metal models and RTB01, which is like the next generation on. So that was like when Jez Goodwin came in, and Ali Morrison, new group of sculptors, and of course the iconic RTB01 Imperial Space Marine model set. So even before there was this idea of Space Marine armour marks, there was already a variety in how people were sculpting Space Marines and drawing them as well. But it was all essentially featured or centred around what is Mark 6, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 1990, White Dwarf 129, there was an article published called Armour Through the Ages. And what this did is this created like a visual and story history of Space Marine armour marks, yeah? So my first sort of retrospect, I didn't think of it at the time, with retrospect, this idea is kind of like how military armour changed with time. And there's a couple of famous examples, aren't there? There's the Roman legions, which very much so aligns with the name of the Space Marines. You can also see the same thing if you look at medieval armour, so the age of chivalry in Europe. I don't know the history as well for the Middle East and Southeast Asia armour development, because there were military societies and cultures there that developed protective armour. I'm sure there was evolution there, but obviously this was designed in England and Great Britain, so that's where the cultural influence was. And there was an interview with John Blanche a few months ago on a channel, I can't remember its name now, I'll put it on the screen, where he talked about Space Marine armour a bit, and he said, he was talking a bit about, because he did this concept artwork, he was talking about what it means, and he said, and why it's interesting, and he said it's their armour, it's a heraldry, and people are interested in that. And I think when he did the concept artwork sketches for the armour marks, that was very much what it's tied into. He created, well, him and Rick Priestley, there were 7 armour marks. There was Mark 1 Thunder Armour, Mark 2 Crusade, Mark 3 Iron Armour, Mark 4 Maximus, Mark 5 Heresy, Mark 6 Corvus Armour, and then Mark 7 Eagle Armour. And Mark 7 is what a lot of people think of Space Marines being. Mm-hmm. And they all had the stories, and they all had the sort of particular visual look. But Mark 5 was, so this was framed in the context of the Horus Heresy, the development of the armour, and the Great Crusade. And indeed, well, I suppose Mark 1 was the first Space Marines, and that was the Unification Wars. So it went all the way back to the very start of the Imperial story. So 2, 3, 4 were all developments during the Great Crusade. Then Mark 6 came along, but then the Horus Heresy happened, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's terrible galactic cataclysm, it's terrible civil war. And within that, Space Marines were created in new and novel and not particularly stable ways always. And there wasn't enough of either the older designs to equip large numbers of troops or the newer designs. While they were all manufactured, they couldn't be manufactured in the quantities needed to equip the legions of new initiates and inducti as well. And that's where Mark V came in. Mark V was a stopgap armour design made from commonly available stockpile components, so stuff left over from the Mark II and III program, maybe bits from the 4, which was hodgepodged together into a stopgap design, which was then produced en masse. Didn't exclusively equip all the Marines, but it certainly equipped a lot. And this became known as a Heresy suit. And it was built in the Heresy out of a necessity for it, but it wasn't manufactured after that, certainly by the Loyalists. The traitors continued to use it. A few suits survived in Loyalists, but they didn't really like it because of what it represented. And that was that original artwork, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why when John Blanche sketched it, it had all these lots of molecular bonding studs as like a cheaper form of resistant plating, and then all these cables, power cables visible, yeah? Mm-hmm. Nowhere near as sophisticated in a way, even as Mark II armour, and definitely compared to Mark IV. So that is a concept of Mark V, isn't it?
Yeah. I wonder if he took inspiration from the British Cromwell tank from World War II. Mm. If I remember correctly, the Cromwell was a bit of a hodgepodge, ramshackle piece of crap, basically, that they just stuck bonding studs to the front, because I remember the Cromwell's front always had those rather large rivets, the big bonding stud, almost like to deflect from German Panzer and Tiger and all other variant tanks' heavy armor. Maybe it'll hopefully ping off. Because at that point, obviously, when they were fighting alone and they had the armor, they didn't really get a lot of supplies of the Sherman tanks from the Americans. So maybe he took, I don't know, but maybe he took inspiration from that, because the first thing I remember when I did go to the Tank Museum in the UK and I saw a Cromwell for the first time.
The one at Bovington?
Yes. Yes. When I went, I've only been there, I'd love to go back. But the one time I was there and I'd actually seen a Cromwell for the first time, all I could think about was Mark V. Because of all the studs. I was like, oh, okay. That makes me think of something else,
Yeah, well, your subconscious is thinking, is connecting the correct dots there, because that is where the bonding studs came from, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So viewers, we're going to have a little bit of armour history here. So in the UK, at the outbreak of World War II, all the best skilled workers in terms of how technologically advanced we were when it came to metalworking were sucked up by two arms of the military, and that was the RAF, the Air Force, and the Royal Navy. Yeah. So, in other words, where did all the welders go? Well, they went to working armaments production for either the Navy or the RAF, which were the priority. Yeah. And I won't get into a long chat about defence economics here, but
different podcast.
But anyone who thinks the army is where all the resources go in a modern war, no. The army is the 10% or the 15% left over. Most of your resources go on your Air Force and your Navy. Certainly for a power, certainly for a maritime power. What that meant, though, is the army needed tanks, and particularly after the events of the expeditionary campaign of 1940. So
Dunkirk, essentially.
Where
they left all their gear behind.
Yeah. How do we make tanks? It's like, well, we'll have to use the rail workers who are all very trained and skilled in metalwork, but they know how to rivet. Yeah. They're not welders, but they're riveters. Yeah. So
they're the best of what's left.
Yeah. And they were very, very good at what they did. But if you look at it, a tank with riveted armour weighs more and has some design compromises compared to one that's welded armour. Although welded armour can still be rubbish if not done properly. Panther tank. T-34, yes.
Yeah.
So those studs on the Cromwell tank, and there's a whole bunch of other British tanks of the era which have riveted armour, And the reason was because they had to be designed for manufacture by the rail industry, where the technology they had for joining metal together, metal plates together, and frames was rivets. So, that's where the bonding studs come from.
Oh.
And that was pretty much as it was described. The bonding studs were used to hold several armor plates together to improve protection, because it was easier to manufacture several thinner plates rather than one thick one to give the same protection, but it weighed more. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark V is described as it was a heavier suit, like for like with any of the other marine armor marks, Mark III accepted.
Was it also the one, I think if I remember, wasn't Mark V also the one that had the power pack issue? So the marine inside was always sweating?
Yeah, and that's the
power distribution issues. Yeah.
They still had essentially the same power pack or a similar output power pack. So they had a choice. Either they turn the power up to get the same sort of level of motive boost as a normal suit of marine armor does and get very hot, or turn the power down a bit to keep the cooling acceptable, but, have less power. Well, it was never done in such a way you could represent on the tabletop. There was, if you're playing an RPG, you could put rules in to reflect that.
It almost sounds like pariah armor.
Well, let's come back to that one.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps that's where some of the idea for pariah armor came from. So there was these series of sketches by John Blanche, and at the same time there was a series of complementary miniatures by Jez Goodwin. I don't know which came first. I don't know if the miniatures came first or if the art concepts came first. I really don't know that. I mean, John Blanche is a real ideas person. He created loads of ideas. So it wouldn't surprise me if he created it. But likewise, Jez Goodwin's an ideas person as well. So I really don't know if Blanche did the artwork and then Goodwin sculpted the miniatures based upon it, or if it was the other way around.
Well, maybe somebody know in the comments, and they'll stick it down and just say, well, this is more the precise chronological, sort of who came first. But either way, we got them, and that's the good thing,
We did,
the beginning of it.
And that's where Space Marine Armor Marks were born,
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite an influential article, and it has had a long reach in terms of its impact on Games Workshop ranges, and, you could argue that the Heresy only exists because that article was written. So that was the first step, wasn't it, on the way? Then the next step, we think, is another one-off model that was sculpted. And I think this was sold under what was called Armour Through the Ages. And there's a photo of him on the screen now. And this guy is quite different in certain respects. So his legs are similar, with the bonding studs and stuff. He's got a set of plastic arms, so he hasn't got the bonding stud on his left shoulder. He's got a chest rig, which looks like the artwork. But his helmet is I don't know.
It's not the best, is it? Aesthetic-wise, it looks very doggish. It looks like a pronounced snout. It's almost like whoever was designing this was looking a wee bit too much at a Mark IV and a Mark VI. When this is obviously meant to have that flat grill, like almost Sauron pattern.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, isn't it?
I suppose, though, when they made this miniature, we had the late noughts tactical plastic kit, and this was released with those. That's why, for example, as you say, he has the plastic arms and a Goodwin pattern bolt gun instead of something more reminiscent of the time frame he's meant to be from.
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it?
Yeah, even look at his legs. His legs are technically Mark 6 with bonding studs on them. They're not really the Mark 5 with the semicircular knee pad.
Yeah, no, they're not. So even there, it's different. And I think this model shows from the very outset how there was inconsistency in terms of how these armors looked. They did mess around with the designs quite a lot. And I think that's important to bear in mind as we move forward because, one thing on that Armour Through the Ages Mark 5, I always think it looks like what happens if a suit of Space Marine armor has offspring with a Dalek. It's a bit of a. It does always make me think a bit of the Davros for some reason. Yeah, it's a weird looking thing, and I don't really think they took that any further. Before we move on, actually, you mentioned something a couple of moments ago about the Sauron pattern helmet of the original model and the artwork. Yeah. That is actually a nod, I think, to one of the prototype Terminator designs of this era. So before we got Indomitus armor. Indomitus Terminator armor. There were 3 prototype Terminator models, yeah. I've done a Retro Hammer video on this. The first one was Mr. Shoulder Pads by Jez Goodwin. And it's referred to somewhat erroneously as Saturnine armor. That may change in the future, but at the moment it's not Saturnine armor. It might be, but we can't be sure. The second one was what I call the Turtleback. And that was by Bob Naismith, I think. Very unusual, different design. And then the third was, it's almost a bit forgotten now, but the one thing that is memorable, it was in some Space Hulk artwork and they used it for the box art on Space Hulk on the rear of it, which was quite naughty because they painted the metal models blue so they looked plastic. The metal models blue, but the helmet on that looks like a Mark 7 helmet, yeah? And I think that was in the article when it's saying they used bits from a Terminator program. I think they were making a little nod to that model. I wonder if that's the case there.
No, sounds like it, yeah.
So we had Armour Through the Ages, and then the next thing we found was, do you want to talk about this one? Photo on screen now. So this was from a book, wasn't it?
Yes, the How to Paint Space Marines.
Was that actually what it's called?
Yeah. This was a book that was released in 2004, if I believe, and it was called How to Paint Space Marines.
Right.
You'll probably remember this one for people who are of that time. I'm not going to say any more. It was the cover that had at that point in time, because it was just when 4th edition had been released, the new metal Marneus Calgar upscaled. Do you remember the box set that he came with his honor guard and stuff, and he had the flag or the banner and things?
Oh, yeah.
It was that one with the 4 panel in the background showing different chapters, and then it was the blue A4 size book, old Games Workshop logo, and it said How to Paint Space Marines. And inside one of the pages, it had this line drawing of all of the marks, but this was the one that it had for the Mark V. So as you can see, they've taken the sort of the spiritual feel of the Armour Through the Ages and the Jez Goodwin design, but they've obviously refined it to suit the scale of the proportions of the current era, or what would be then the current era Space Marine. And they obviously have also cleaned up that helmet, which looks a lot nicer and more what we would now consider a standard Mark V, the grille, the bonding studs, that sort of very aggressive look.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's got all the key things like the cross cabling on the torso, the heavy cabling at the sides. It's got that sort of almost like grill on the center rig, and then you've got the cabling on the legs. The bonding studs are interesting because they're lower profile than they'd been before, and there's more of them. Well, if you look at the original sketch by John Blanche, depending on the leg, it matches the number of bonding studs, because you could tell it was just doing it as designs. He wasn't sort of doing it as a precise one. Because one leg's got 4 studs down the front, the other's got 2. But here they've gone with lots of small studs.
Yeah. It's definitely got that sort of the ramshackle feel to it, where they need as many of these on as possible, but they also have to be symmetrical. They can't just be thrown on willy-nilly.
Yeah.
And it's got something that is only really seen in this piece of artwork right now, until we see the apothecary that was released that was shown off in a Heresy Thursday just a few months ago now, I believe.
Yeah, just
the
before
knee
Christmas.
pads. Yeah, the knee pads of this artwork match that Marine because the bottom of the knee pad is more flat and the top is more oval, where in future iterations, it's just a circle. You know, it's almost like a circular plate that's placed on top. This one has an awkward shape to it, and honestly, I think it's a really, really nice design. You know, that they've used. Yeah, it's just like when the guy was probably designing it, he probably looked at the original John Blanche and Jess Goodwin sketches and went, right, how many bonding studs and fiber bundle cables can I stick onto this guy before he looks absolutely ridiculous, but also unbelievably nasty?
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't laugh at this fella, you know?
Oh, no, I mean, people often say that Mark 7 armour is the meanest looking Marine armour because of a face grill, but I think this image of the Mark 5 looks more mean because it's got the imposing face grill and then all that cabling and studliness just looks menacing, doesn't it?
Yeah. The Mark 7 is a beautiful suit of armour, I'm not going to deny that, but it has that sort of smooth elegance to it when it comes to the Aquila pattern, because you've got the refined design and the smooth armor panels, the lovely big Aquila, and it looks great. Whereas this just looks like, you know, that sort of the brother we don't talk about, you know, that kind of thing. He's got all the roughest crap, and he looks more, you know, between a 7 and a 5, he is obviously the nastier Space Marine. Let's use a lore example. The Carcharodons exclusively in lore, in the Badab sense, run nothing but 5.
Yeah.
And these are guys, obviously, as we know, pale skin, black eyes, file their teeth, and they're sharks.
Yeah.
And they use the 5.
So it's a refinement of the previous design, and they've abandoned the goof that was the armour through the ages one, haven't they?
Yeah. Which was good for the time, but a bit comical in today's design.
That's the thing. If you don't experiment, then, you know, you don't find a good design. Sometimes you get things that don't work as well, don't you?
Yeah.
When you look at these are very interesting as well on another level because there's a silhouette of all of them. And I think the Forge World colour plays that we all came to know so well from the Badab books and the Vrax books, and then, of course, the Heresy Black books, they were directly derived. Obviously, the designs have changed a bit, but the concept is very similar to these drawings here. So I think this section here has been quite influential in the long run for Marine art as well. Okay, so we've got this version. Now, there was never a model of this, was there?
No, there was never a model of this. We had pieces in the tactical kit. When they released the mid-2000s tactical kit, I believe, they had 2 Mark V torsos, and they had obviously 2 studded shoulder pads. Now, by default, you can use those for Mark VI or Mark V. So that's about as much as we ever got for any concept of usable Mark V armor until we got to the Forge World Badab stage.
Not even on Chaos Marines at this point.
They had roughly the same. When we talk about the early noughts Chaos Marine kit, they also had a Mark V torso, but no studded shoulder pads, and all of their legs were those early Mark VI, you know, the metal banding around the top and bottom of the leg and the spike that runs down the middle.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because back in those days, remember, they didn't have a lot of variety. It was just everybody had the same set of legs.
Yeah, so interesting. And we'll come back to this drawing because I think this is going to become important in the modern iteration of Heresy armour. Okay, so moving on, then we have a miniature, don't we? A slightly unusual miniature, and perhaps one that many people don't realise is Mark V. And this is the Master of the Relics. And this was a part of a whole bunch of, well, I'll say a bunch, a whole group, a little set of models of the Space Marine specialist officers, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think there was a Master of the Relics, a Master of the Records or something. It might have been Records, but, you know, the guy with the big scroll.
Yeah.
Who makes a great word bearer chaplain. And there were a couple of others, weren't they? But in amongst these, they sneaked in some lovely nods, some old armour marks. And this guy is perhaps most overtly retro-equipped because he is wearing what is definitively recognisable in its entirety as a Mark V suit.
Yeah, with the exception of the backpack and the right shoulder pad, yeah, he's basically quintessential Mark V. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, there's a bit. Yeah, he has got a bit of variation there. Yes, the backpack, because at this time they weren't into doing armor mark specific backpacks, so they all got the same standard backpacks, didn't they?
Yeah. Back when this model was made, yeah, they hadn't really expanded that idea that different armor marks equate to a variant backpack. Everybody just got the same plastic one.
They did,
It was
yeah.
basically a cost-cutting measure. You know, you got the metal miniature, and then you got a standard tactical marine backpack thrown in the little clamp pack.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
you know,
artistically they'd had the idea, as we've looked at already, but from a miniature range production, no, they weren't there yet.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so we had him, and that brings us to like a really important moment in the development of Mark V with the Mark V Heresy armor set from Forge World. Now, of course, these weren't for the Heresy, were they?
No, they weren't actually. The first ever iteration of 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 was actually for the Badab series.
Yes,
because a lot of the chapters that fought in the Badab War had a lot of the older marks of armor, and Forge World always did those lovely line drawn but colored in versions where, if you remember the double page spread Leaky, they would have like, squad Leaky, and it would be like 5 pictures of different Marines.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd have different armor marks per man, and they'd have his name, his blurb, and if he was killed in action, or if he did like something of note, like killed 5 Firehawks getting hit with a plasma gun, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They were really good from a narrative point of view to see sort of what the squads were like, but also that this ramshackled nature, because honestly, before that, when I would see people in the store that I would go to, when they were building their miniatures, for some reason, it never really occurred to them to build them to not look like the box art. So you'd always see the same person taking the 6 legs, the 6 torso, and giving them the beaky, or the 5, and they, nobody ever thought or would say to them, well, you do know, look at this picture. He's obviously got a 6 legs but a 5 torso.
That was your story. My closest friends I used to game with, they were well into mixing and matching parts, so they were ahead of the curve.
Yeah, they must have been. My store was very much,
what do you call it, very doctrinal.
Yeah. I mean, I once knew a person who bought 10 boxes of Space Marines, right, solely to replicate the same mark of armor 10 times.
Wow.
I know, and he thought this was brilliant. He was like, look, there's 10 identical guys in the same squad. Isn't it brilliant? He thought it was lovely. I looked at it and went, well, I can't tell them apart. So,
yeah, well,
no.
well, hey, if that floats his boat,
yeah,
it floats his boat, then fair enough. Yeah, so the Badab Wars led to Forge World producing sets of armors, specific armors, and the range of weapons available to go with them. There's a whole bunch of bolters. So here we had yet another development on the Mark V armor. The new thing here is they did a new backpack. So finally had a power pack. Now this power pack harked back to the original RTB-01 era plastic backpacks. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Definitely looks like a Mark VI.
Yeah, it was based on that. So that was big sort of like new thing here. Obviously the resin, so it's a different sort of medium. The helmet is new as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the helmet clearly is a Mark V helmet, and it's clearly paying artistic nods to the other one. But it also has a new sort of look to it as well, doesn't it? I don't know. I difficult to describe it. I suppose they rejuvenated the design and thought, yeah, we can make this look really cool.
Yeah, they went for a sleeker design with a smaller sort of mouth grill and more pronounced, what you would call the jaw element. They're very pronounced, obviously. And then when they've went for the studs, they've went for sort of a symmetrical 2 studs before the little raised area at the top of the head, and then a couple at the side.
Yeah, and that's like the birth of modern Mark V. And I think for a lot of people, they will probably think this is Mark V because it's this design that fed into the Heresy, and in the Heresy art is what we see. And I imagine for quite a few people who've come into the Heresy in recent years or via the Forge World stuff, they will imagine that this is Mark V armor. But of course, it was only the next step on this evolution that we've been documenting, isn't it?
Yeah, just another piece of the puzzle.
Indeed. And a couple of years after this, we got I think probably 4 years actually. I think the Badab kit came out in 2011. The catalogue I got this out of was from 2011. I don't know if it was released in 2011 or 2012. It was around then. In 2016, we got a revised version of the kit, which is now on screen. Confusingly, it's called Mark V Heresy Armour. It is different. You can see that the product number is different.
Mm-hmm. Technically, it was originally called Legion Mark V Heresy Armour. That's how they differentiated between the Badab set and the Heresy set on the Forge World web store. And when you were attempting to purchase, you would have to say, could I have the Legion one instead of the other one? You know,
they did that on the website. They didn't do it in the catalogue.
Yeah.
And actually, when I was going back through my catalogues, there was never a time when both were available. Mark V. So one replaced the other. And this happened at the same time as they rejuvenated the Mark VI kit as well from the Badab ones, which they were okay, but the legs were a bit skinny.
They were very thin, weren't they?
Yeah. I think the thin legs works on Mark IV, but not so much on 6 and 5. And these guys here, so yeah, a couple of things. The legs are chunkier. If anyone owns these models, they're actually quite tall, and they compare really well to the new Mark VI and Mark III ranges in plastic. So while proportioned, they're kind of like the classic, slightly big head, slightly small legs. Height-wise, they stack up pretty well to the new Mark VI's range. But yeah, so this was the next step. And it wasn't just these guys either, was it? Because they also appeared as a despoiler squad and as an assault squad with some different leg posers, if I remember rightly. Nice kits. The assault squad kit is one of the best sources of hands ever done for Space Marines. It's also one of the most fiddly and time-consuming kits to build that I've ever dealt with from Forge World for infantry.
Yeah, I think I once had a squad of them, and when I tried to build them, I was nearly sectioned under the Mental Health Act.
Oh dear.
You know, I love, like, as I've told you before, I've loved Mark V, but no, even I had to rage quit at those. You know?
I mean, I built 20 once as a commission, and you know the standard that I do my models to.
Oh yeah.
It was a big job. It was a big job, but I did have a lot of fun, and to preserve my sanity, I did some novelty poses. So one of them was a guy shooting his bolt pistol gangster style. And another one I did in a Naruto run pose.
Oh.
But I mean, it sounds silly to say it, but I really like that model. The client was pleased that they were amused. Particularly when
I'm pretty sure Mr. Naruto Mark V died first. I always get the feeling that he would run ahead of his brethren to take the shots.
He does, yeah. He always leads them in. Well, actually, no, what happens is he leads them in. He always survives through chance, but sometimes gets his whole squad killed. Yeah,
I think I know what the guy called him. For those that would maybe know the internet meme, I'm pretty sure Naruto Mark V is called Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah, yes, he would. Yes, yeah, that's his. Yeah, definitely. So we are now on the cusp of the modern age of Mark V armor, but there is one little cheeky addition that they sneaked in before we get there, isn't there?
Oh yes, the Praevian.
The Praevian, yes. So, hiding in plain sight, they released this guy, and it's the Praevian. So, the Praevian is a consul, isn't he, in the Legion list? And he is the master of the robots. So, he gets to control combat cyborgs, so the Thalax, and the combat robots, so the automata like the Castellax and the Vorax. And they did a model for it, which is really cool. So, it's got some great bits, but they also were sneaky and went, haha, a Mark V armor. And it's really nicely done. They also, as well, said, well, let's make this Mark V, but also Mark V star non-production, because he's wearing a suit of Mark V armor, apart from his cybernetic leg, which is equipped with Mark III.
Yeah, the lower leg has a Mark III plate to cover any exposed areas that could maybe take a bullet or two.
Yeah.
Because the last thing he wants is he's lost the leg. He doesn't really want to lose the bionic,
Yeah, but I think it's cool, and it's a bit of a mishmash. The arms are perhaps not quite the same Mark V as the others, and the leg cabling, they've gone back more to that. The How to Paint Space Marines.
Yeah,
the leg cabling is more in the style of that, as opposed to the big flat square cables of the Badab Mark V's and the Heresy Mark V's. So I suppose this is a bit of you could almost say it's like an experimental one, but nonetheless, this is a Mark V miniature they did. And again, it shows how much the Games Workshop designers, be they at GW or at Forge World, like to play around with these concepts. Mark V has a very definite set of visual characteristics, doesn't it? But the details do vary.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It's almost like when they give them the product brief, they basically say to them, within reason, go nuts, but it must include fiber bundle cables at the top of the leg. It must include bonding studs at the lower leg, helmet, and one shoulder pad. And it must include the fiber bundle cables in the X pattern on the torso. But apart from that, go nuts.
Fill your boots, yeah. And they do that. And this model is a cool model, and it's also nice to see the experimentation with the design as well.
Oh, definitely. It is a beautiful miniature. I have to admit, I would never use a Praevian in my list, and yet I own 3 of these guys purely to use them. Yeah, in 3 of my separate Heresy armies, I've purposely taken the Praevian miniature and used him as a veteran sergeant.
Nice. Yeah, well,
obviously take off any Praevian equipment, but given the fact he looks, obviously he's been through the wars, figuratively and literally, I always love the idea that, this veteran sergeant's in the Mark V, and maybe back in the day he had Mark III, and then obviously he got wounded, lost his leg, but that's all he's been able to salvage is that single piece of Mark III.
Yeah.
When they give him his new production era Mark V.
Yeah, and that's a nice thing, isn't it, with models like this? You can have stories around them.
Oh yeah, there's a little bit of narrative is always helps, Yeah.
And another little thing about how they changed design, so you can see his groin armour has got bonding studs on it. And this was something that Forge World, this was something that kind of appeared in How to Paint Space Marines and then got developed a little bit in Master of the Relics.
Yeah, and even the earliest concept picture has it too, just below the Aquila on his belt buckle. He has 3 little studs.
Yeah, but interestingly, the original Mark V Heresy suit metal miniature didn't have it. So again, all these little changes how they play around, and perhaps that suits Mark V as well. Even within the idea of production, Mark V production, there's variation. When you think of the size of the Galaxy and the Imperium, there's going to be variations.
Yeah, I mean, the Master of the Relics has another good example of that. If you look at the belt buckle of the Master of the Relics, he has the rather large white Aquila, which is a good reference to the original concept art that they did. But on the first metal miniature, the second metal miniature, the line drawing from Space Marines and the Badab one, none of them copied that.
Oh, the first metal miniature did.
Oh, did he?
It's a bit hard to see. He's got a tiny little eagle there, although it's not in a shield. But they then dropped it for Armour Through the Ages and How to Paint Space Marines.
Yeah.
So but you're right. They play around with concepts. So the dawn of what we hope is the new age of Mark V. Now, is often the case with the 20th Legion. They sneaked in the first. And so this was announced towards the end of last year, wasn't it? And this is the Alpha Legion Saboteur.
I believe he was the first consul we've seen in that sort of consul run we've had.
Yeah.
Where I think they showed him off one week, and then we got the White Scar Stormseer the next week, and then we got somebody else the week after. And that's when we began to see this. Remember we talked about it in our predictions video. I was like, well, this obviously is a pattern. Maybe we'll start to see the Beowulf Jarls and some of the other consoles. And we've actually been proved right. Though they may not be Mark V, we've just seen the Siegebreaker, sorry.
Yeah.
Last week or the week before, we saw the Siegebreaker.
Yeah. Week before, yeah. It's last week, or this week, week before last, wasn't it? Or was it the week before that? Was last week Legions Imperial? Oh, I cannot remember now. No, they are fulfilling our things. So here we had the first modern's not right, because the Praevian's quite modern. The first miniature from the Age of Darkness era in Mark V armor.
2.0. I think the best way to describe it is the Praevian is a 1.0 modern era. The console the Saboteur is 2.0 modern era.
And so there's some interesting things on this guy. So first is, this guy's a bit of an artificer suit. Yeah, there's some things that aren't Mark V here. But one thing that is common to all the ones we're going to look at is the stud arrangement on his leg armour. Yeah, so you've got 2 studs at the narrow point, and that's consistent with all the others. You got the knee pad design shape that you described.
Yeah, the sort of flat at the bottom, more circular at the top, rather than just a proper circle. Yeah.
Now, this is what I think is perhaps very interesting as well, is the leg cabling. Yeah, they've got the wide leg cables, and they're the sort of square design, but they look lower profile to me.
Yeah, I would agree. They definitely do look more recessed into the armor almost, and they just jut out a wee bit, rather than actually just being like completely out of the armor.
Yeah, and seeing that makes me wonder, is this something that's more suitable to make in plastic?
Mm-hmm. The only thing we can't confirm is the crotch. Compared to the earlier iterations, the crotch has 4 small studs and an armor break in the middle. Unfortunately, what comes after him, the Apothecary and the Rivenhound, but they both have a little tabard, so we can't actually confirm if that's
is that going to be a common design thing? Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
And on that, let's move on to the Apothecary, because here, in full, unadulterated view, we have the Mark V armour, as I think is going to be represented in Age of Darkness. So again, he's got the low-profile upper leg cables, the standardised number of studs on his legs. The pauldron has more studs on it than a Mark VI pauldron.
Yeah, smaller too. Yeah, smaller studs, more of them.
The helmet has undergone another redesign. I mean, it's quite subtle, and obviously it's an Apothecary helm, so we can't read too much into it, but it looks like it's got a sort of more square look.
Yeah.
Who's it who you mentioned earlier, the Carcharodon chap?
Tiberos.
Yeah, Tiberos, the Red Wake.
Yeah.
It makes me think of his helmet quite a lot.
Yeah, compared to the original, well, I hate to use that term original, compared to the Forge World Badab variant, it honestly looks like they've taken their Mark V and almost like stretched it out front to back rather than side to side, because it honestly looks more pronounced at the front.
Yeah.
Almost like it's wider, almost like a Mark VI, where they, instead of it continuing into a beak, they've literally just chopped it in half.
Chopped off, yeah. Could be, yeah, I see what you mean, yeah. I can't wait to get my hands on this model. First, because I think it's a cool model. It's also it's a medic, and I need medics. But I'm also conscious that the helmet's painted white, and the way it's been photographed. I mean, one of the things with how Games Workshop do their marketing photos, they will take multiple images of the same model, each one slightly at different focal depths, and then they'll composite them into a whole.
Mm-hmm.
So what that does, it gives very crisp, clear images, but it also removes field of depth effects. So they look a little bit flat and unnatural. And that combined with the white colour, I need to see that piece in my hand to really get my head around its geometry.
Yeah, definitely. That's the kind of miniature that the day that it goes up for pre-order, we know that Warhammer World always puts the pre-order minis in that little cabinet beside the till. That's the kind of one you'd wish to purposely go and see in 3 dimensions, if you know what I mean. Before you purchase like half a dozen, you do want to go and have a good look. You're going to purchase it regardless, but it'd be nice to see it in 3 dimensions,
Yeah, I think it looks great. And wouldn't it be great if we're going to get a plastic version of Mark V? And that nicely segues us into the final model we're going to talk about, which is your boy Endred.
Oh, yes, the Rivenhound, an absolute unit who, while he's wearing Mark V, his is very unique in the sense that his bonding studs are actually more squarish.
I think when they were designing him, they thought, how do we make him look more brutal? So one thing they did was they gave him the battle damage.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought they decided is, instead of having hemispherical studs, we'll give him square ones. And I think it works. It adds to the visual brutality of the model.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the design, though, in terms of like its basic elements, it's following the same pattern as the Apothecary, isn't it?
Yeah, the same amount of studs, 2 symmetrical on the left and the right-hand side of the knee pad, and roughly, given the battle damage, we can't really tell. Rough calculation says that he has the same amount on his left shoulder pad as well.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
Yeah, although they're just obviously a different mark or a different version of bonding stud, whether he stole these from Zana or one of the other raids he did, and they're all just, hammered in to replace potential destroyed bonding studs.
Yeah, and look, you can see how huge he is.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, he's an absolute unit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm presuming it's difficult to tell, but it looks like he's on a 32 base. You can see he looks a bit bigger than the other guys.
He's almost falling out of it. Back in the day, as we know, Space Marines could barely stand on a 25. He looked like that.
When he ordered his armor, I think he might have tried on the XXXL set, and even then he had to send it off for largening.
Yeah.
You know what he reminds me of a bit? The proportions of him. He almost looks a bit unnatural, which I think is kind of like, he's a Space Marine. He reminds me of the 3 Ultramarines from the 2011 or 2012 computer game Space Marine.
Yes, Captain Titus, Sergeant Leandros, and the other guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and the filthy backstabber. Sorry. Yeah.
I know. The Codex does not support this action. I'm giving you to the Inquisition.
Yeah, it's like, try to keep up.
Boy, who are you? Oh, I hope he comes back in the next game and he gets, demoted.
It really puts me in mind of that particular representation of Space Marines in terms of proportions. And yeah, I like it.
Yeah, it is a beautiful kit. Now, I have seen some people give a bit of criticism about the miniature regarding he doesn't exactly match the artwork created by Neil Roberts. And yes, there is a few small alterations, but in the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't really consider them a big deal. I'm very pleased with the miniature, and I cannot wait to get my hands on them. I wouldn't be sitting whinging going, in his original, he didn't have that Archaeotech pistol. He didn't have the World Eater logo on the back. At least we're getting the miniature. I'm not trying to sound like a simp or a shill, but at least we are getting a relatively nice miniature. And given the fact that most Space Marine arms come separate from the body of the kit, if people wish to recreate the artwork style that Neil Roberts created compared to the miniature, that's quite easy, because most of the arms of Space Marine kits do come separately. So if you want to have the rope chain style backpack that he had, if you want to change the Archaeotech pistol, go on ahead. He's a Black Shield. You can do whatever you want with him.
Exactly. And the art that Neil Roberts did is cool. Everyone knows it. But it's still his interpretation. And anyone who knows anything about Endrid Har also knows that when he met the, I just forget the name of the Forge Lord now.
Raijin?
Raijin on Zana. He was wearing Mark III armor. Mm-hmm. Wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, because he had stolen Raxal Koradan's armor. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think some people get way too hung up on inconsequential details with the art, personally. Mm-hmm. I think what matters is the kind of impression of the model and the thematic feel of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's ways to convert models as well to how people like them.
Yeah. It has a little bit of everything, I mean, some people, let's not dwell on it, but if you take the Dominion Xiphon issue where his artwork was very different from the plastic miniature we got released, some people did take issue with that, because in the artwork he is Mark III, and in the lore he obviously wears heavy Mark III. He's got bionics, but when we got his miniature, he's in the Mark VI. Yeah. Now, while some people would decry you got him wrong, fair enough, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, I just always took the idea that he got a new set from Arkan Lan. So, Arkan Lan's like his best mate, so he's like, here, look, you're running about in that old gear, I've got you something nicer.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And given the story about the Loyalists managing to snatch a load of Mark VI suits from Mars at the time of the schism, what's his name's little sortie?
Sigismund and...
Sigismund, sortie, yeah. They grabbed a load of Mark VI armour, so it makes sense that defenders on Terra were re-equipped with it. I mean, they'll be making it anyway. I think one of the other interesting things with Endrid Har being in Mark V, and what is clearly production Mark V, because that's what we're talking about pretty much today, is like Xiphon and like Fafnir Ran, they were both early releases of the new style of armour Mark VI and Mark III, weren't they?
Yeah, definitely.
So
they were ahead of their time, especially the two first plastic miniatures we got for 2.0.
Yeah, so is the fact that we're getting Endred Har in Mark 5 one of those little Easter eggs as well? Here's your character, expect the troops similar.
I would really hope so, because let's be honest, when they released the teaser for the Beta Garmin book, they showed us a couple of Black Shield warbands in Mark III and the Mark VI that we currently have. Yeah. And they done a couple of color schemes, threw on some transfers, give them some melee weapons, which I'm hoping are from the melee weapon upgrade kit. We just haven't got that confirmed yet. But they didn't show us any new marks of armor. I'm hoping that they were just this is what we can show you now, but eventually, this is what you'll see, you know.
Thinking about it and looking at what the pattern is, they know that the armor mark sets are a big deal, and that's, like a headliner product. Had it with the Mark 6, Age of Darkness. The Mark 3s has been the big reveal at Warhammer Fest.
Mm-hmm.
I think, they'll save the next armor update for another big moment in the marketing calendar.
Well, Adepticon is next month.
Well, I wouldn't complain.
Oh,
but
neither would I.
I don't want to be overly optimistic about getting Mark 5, but my view on the likelihood of it happening as a plastic, that's what I suppose what we're leading to talk about. Are we going to get a Mark 5 tactical squad set?
Yeah.
I now feel it's much more likely than I did, 2 months ago.
Yeah. That being said, I'm hoping for a big reveal next month. If I remember correctly, Adepticon was where they first showed off 2.0 in March 2 years ago. So it might be a nice little continuity thing that maybe every Adepticon we might see something nice.
Yes, and there's no Warhammer Fest this year, is there?
No, there isn't, yes. So they'll either have to fill that space in the calendar, or they'll have to distribute those previews to other previews.
Yeah,
because they know like the previews are a big, everybody likes the preview. We get to see what comes, so it's nice that they've kept this running thing that we get at least one preview every 2 months since COVID happened, because they couldn't do the proper big reveals at the events they would go to.
Yeah.
So I'm glad they've kept that. It gives you something to look forward to.
It does. Yeah. I don't know. Like I say, I don't want to be overly optimistic. There are obviously challenges with making a Mark 5 Marine in plastic because of all the studs. But with these 3 characters appearing in Mark 5, and the next campaign book being Beta Garmin and the Black Shields and the Shattered Legions, I don't know. My gut is telling me that Mark 5 is going to be the armour for this year, because if not now, then when would you do it? There's things you would do to build it up for Mark 4 or Mark 2, but what they're building up for now feels like a Mark 5 moment. And, if you look at the Rangers, there is a bit of a Mark 5, study silhouette shaped hole in the range at the moment. Obviously, there's Mark 2 as well, but, there is a Mark 4 kit at the moment.
Yeah.
We've got 3, we've got 6 in the new, so maybe, just maybe, touch wood, this will be the year for Mark 5.
With any luck. I foresee it, unfortunately, going one of 2 ways. They'll either release it with a massive fanfare, or they'll prioritize the fanfare of the Mark II and the Mark IV, and Mark V will just be randomly dropped some year, as in, here's the last set, job's a good one, whatever.
Yeah.
So it'll either come out with pomp and ceremony, or it'll come out and without just any sort of like, hooray, they'll just be like, here it is, there you go.
Might just be a bit like the end thing. We'll see. Yeah. We've covered quite a lot of ground there, and I think if any of the viewers are playing Mark 5 bingo, they'll have scores into the hundreds, if not thousands, by now.
How about we say to them they can play a drinking game every time we say the word Mark 5, they take a shot.
You'll be annihilated in the first 15 minutes, never mind the full episode.
I know. How many people could we get to a hospital with alcohol poisoning from listening to a podcast?
Warning, Legion of Cheese should not be taken as dietary advice. Yeah, great discussion. I hope the listeners, I hope you and viewers, I hope you've all enjoyed this and found it interesting, perhaps a bit entertaining, and certainly informative. As always, we would be interested to hear your thoughts and comments in the section for that.
Yes, indeed. Stick any comments, obviously, down in the section about what you think about Mark 5. Are you a fan? Are you not a fan? Do you like it? What is it you do and do not like about it? Is it the studs? Do you think they're fiddly to paint? Are they annoying? Or is it a suit you really enjoy? Or is it a suit you would prefer they did just release later and you're more of a 2 or a 4 fan,
Yeah, interested to hear your thoughts, because a lot of people talk about Mark V and get excited about it, but we hear a lot of excitement about it, and certainly there's been a lot of interest on social media around posts on the Endred Har model and the Mark V medic. So do let us know. Are you a Mark V fan? Are you, like us, hoping to get it? Okay, so I think that's everything for today. Thanks again, Jay, for joining me for Legion of Cheese.
No problem. Thank you. It was good fun as usual.
Cool. Thank you for listening, everyone, and I will speak to you again soon.
Bye-bye now.